Right, so what I've got here is my mystery wood fingerboard, and I've marked the actual shape of the fingerboard on here. The reason why I've done this is that I'm going to use this both as the fingerboard and actually as the template for the neck, because I'm going to use this to cut out and mark and cut out the shape of the neck. Then I'll cut in my fret slots and do a whole bunch of other stuff. I'll also use the end of it to figure out the shape of the cavity in the body, and I'll work out the placement of the bridge and everything else. So I'm going to cut out the fingerboard, and you can see here that I'm actually going to have a bit which flares out at the end here, and I'll probably cut it off around about here. The reason I'm going to do that is that when the headstock is designed, and I haven't designed it yet, I want to have a little bit of extra space here so that I can play with things and make sure that I don't run out of wood. I'll be using this Japanese saw to cut this out. So let's start setting it up. Blimey. I said before I don't know what this wood is, but it's really hard. It's going to make a great template and a great fingerboard. All right. And this little piece will be used for something. I'm not sure yet, but something. Okay, now it's time to trim the sides of the fingerboard, and I've got a setup here, and I should probably explain what it is. What I've got a piece of MDF, I've got a piece of maple, I've got my fingerboard, I've got another piece of maple, the neck blank, and I've got some coffee. Now the coffee is to keep me awake. The rest of it, however, is fairly standard. What I've done here is made what people call a shooting board. You see, a lot of planes will have that 90-degree angle here, and so I need the sides of my fretboard blank to be at exactly 90 degrees. So what I do is I put a plane on like that on a piece of wood, and if I move it back and forth, I know that I'm planing at 90 degrees to the surface. Right, so here I've got my blank here clamped between bits of wood, and I've got a flat bit of wood here. I've checked it's flat, and I simply run it along. And the idea is I just plane down to the surface until I'm at the line, and it'll be at 90 degrees to the face. And so that's how it works. That's what a shooting board is. You see more complex versions. There are planes specialized for it. But, you know, this is just its most simple, rudimentary form. The plane, by the way, is something called a block plane. And seriously, everyone should have one of these. They're fantastic. They slice, they dice, they program your DVD player. If you're having trouble with your wife, they remember to send it flowers. They're gorgeous things. Get a block plane. Now we're basically there. I need to get this little section here done, and for that I use a saw rasp. I put it in here, and I rasp to the line. Okay, now it's all smoothed. What I'm going to do is just sand down to the final dimensions, and for that I use the longest, flattest thing I've got. In this case it's quite a long aluminium radius block, and the back side is nice and flat. So I place that on there, centre it up, and sand along. So here's a quick final sanding solution. I've got a strip of adhesive sandpaper, a bit of wood which is at 90 degrees, and I put this here, and I can sand the whole thing. I brace it against the wood, keep my 90-degree angle, and just sand away. And here we have a nice perfect template. Sides are at 90 degrees, rounded heel here is at 90 degrees, and I'm going to base my neck on this as well as the body design. Here's just a little side thing. I'm about to put away my block plane, which I've been using, but you'll notice that what I'm doing here is I'm just giving it a very light coat of wax. I use stuff called brie wax. And the idea is that, you know, that cleans off any sweat that you might have gotten onto the plane, and also provides a kind of protective coating for the future. So the idea is that every time you take the plane out of the box, it's basically ready to use. Brie wax isn't going to react badly with other finishes, so, you know, it's not going to put silicone into the wood or anything, and you're not going to pull out a rusty tool. And my planes are all older ones that I actually restored by hand. The last thing I want to do is go through that process of sanding them, flattening them and polishing them all over again. So it's easier just to keep them clean. Okay, now it's time for the designy part. What I've done here is I've laid out my base tuners and I've worked out roughly where they're going to be placed. So I've discovered, looking at these are Goto tuners, that each one can fit roughly inside a 4 centimeter or a 14 millimeter division here without too much of a problem with the edges of the tuners knocking against each other. The interesting thing about these is with guitar tuners you often grasp the sides, but with these I noticed you grab the tops. And so they could even be a little bit closer together if I really wanted, but I think this should be okay. If I'm wrong and I'll get it right on later builds. And so once I've got these marked and I've got the center lines for each hole marked, I'm going to put that onto the wood of the neck and I'm going to work out the exact angle that the headstock is going to be at. Okay, now for working out the headstock shape. So what I've got here is my line. This is the top of the headstock. This is the middle of the tuner, which is going to be the center point of the hole. And then this is the bottom point of the winding post, okay, and then I've added just a tiny amount to compensate for the string thickness on the bottom there. And this bottom dot has to line up with these lines, which are the lines of where the strings are going to go relative to the headstock. I put the bridge down one end, I measured up, so that now I know when the tuners are in place, what I want to have is basically a straight pull from the bridge straight to the tuning peg. That way I've got the most direct path possible. So now what I do is I take a pin and I put it through here. So that is going to be roughly where we're at for our first string, or rather our thickest string, and then we simply pull this down here so that it lines up with our 5th string, and that gives us our headstock angle. Okay, so now I can mark precisely where our headstock's going to go. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark precisely where these holes, the holes for the tuners, are going to go.